be Alexander Downer. Mr. Downer, thanks very much for your time. I want to start with your analysis in the Fin Review today, particularly when it comes to China. You write that diplomacy requires us to stake our ground, that we have to make clear, simple and strong points. What needs to be done in the China context in the wake of COVID-19, in your view?
Well, the most obvious point to make is that we don't want to see this happen again. In 2002, 2003, when I was the foreign minister, the SARS pandemic broke out, and it broke out in southern China. It's a coronavirus, as I understand it, as is COVID-19. So now we have the COVID-19 crisis, and of course it's by many multipliers much more serious than the SARS crisis was. But we have to stop these outbreaks in the first place, and there has to be a proper investigation into how this particular pandemic erupted from China. Apparently it started in Wuhan. Some say it started in wet markets as a result of selling bats. Some people say it could have started in one of these two institutes of virology that happened to be in Wuhan. I mean, of course, we don't have any idea, but we need to know. The world, need to know how this has happened, and that can only happen if there's a proper, independent, international investigation, obviously including the Chinese.
You've suggested the UN Security Council. Would China potentially support that? Of course, they've got a veto on the Security Council. Can you see a scenario in which the Chinese leadership would endorse such an investigation?
Well, I think it would be hard for them to resist. I mean, their instinct would be to resist it because they would say this was a transgression of their national sovereignty. But excuse me if I draw their attention to the fact that the whole world has suffered and suffered grievously. People have died. People have lost their jobs, people have lost their livelihoods, societies have endured huge disruption as a result of a pandemic that came from China. So they may have their sensitivities about there being an international investigation into something in their country. We have our sensitivities as well. So if they want to engage in the international community and be a full-blooded member of the international community, they have to work with the international community. So I think the Security Council is a good place to start. If they vetoed a resolution establishing an investigation, on what basis would they veto it? And what would their argument be? I mean, it would put them under huge pressure. They might be able to get some support. I'm not sure. They might be able to get some support there from the Russians. But it would put them I mean, I'm happy to put them under pressure. They should be put under pressure. They should agree to this investigation. And a neat way to do it would be through a resolution of the United Nations Security Council.
You've said today that you think that their soft power will be damaged in this crisis. Can you elaborate on that for us? What do you mean in that sense?
Well, I think their credibility and reputation will, as time goes on, be very much damaged. Commentators have made the argument both ways. Some have said that this will enhance China's position. I can't really personally see how it will, but some have said that, particularly as a result of them distributing masks and testing equipment, some of which apparently doesn't even work. But I think in the end, it raises questions about China. If pandemics come out of China, this is very damaging to them. I mean, just imagine if a pandemic came out of Australia. How would we feel if a pandemic came out of our country that did so much damage to the whole world? How would we feel about our biosecurity standards? How would we feel about the methods that we introduced to try to stem the spread of the pandemic? And they must be reflecting on all of that in China. And as far as the rest of the world is concerned, we know the pandemic came from China. And I think from China's point of view, it's quite damaging. So the best way for them to manage that is to agree to work with the rest of the world to investigate the causes of it and try to ensure that this sort of thing never happens again.
So that's the way that they restore their credibility in a sense. They've got to cooperate and then essentially shut down this sort of thing via those wildlife wet markets and so on. That's their way back to credibility.
Yes, I mean, I think they should say, they should be contrite about this. I'm not saying they should apologise. I mean, he obviously didn't deliberately do it. Let's accept that. I mean, it's clearly not deliberate. That would be too much of an absurd conspiracy. They did not deliberately do it, but they can be contrite about it, work with the international community, establish how this started. And I mean, I'm not sure whether it will involve the shutting down of the wet markets or it won't. But it's said that the SARS virus started in wet markets in Guangzhou back in the end of 2002. It is said that this virus has started in wet markets in Wuhan, or some say it was an outbreak from an institute or one of the institutes of virology in Wuhan. I mean, we don't know. But we don't want to see it happen again. And from China's point of view, they should be contrite about this and say to the international community, we want you to work with us, have a look at our situation in Wuhan, let us try to trace back what happened, and let's try to put in place the protocols that ensure this doesn't happen again in China or, for that matter, anywhere else.
And as you pointed out in the paper, you're somebody who has promoted for years the growing relationship between Australia and China. So it's not like you're coming to this from the prism of someone who doesn't want engagement with that country.
No, I mean, I've been very strong on engagement with China over many years, and I've often been criticised. I've been criticised for accepting a position some years ago as a non-executive director on the board of Huawei Australia. I negotiated, without going into all the details, any manner of agreements with the People's Republic of China to help promote Australian trade, but to help promote movement of tourists, Chinese tourists to Australia, to help promote students coming from China to study in Australia. I've been all for it. However, when I was the foreign minister, Jiang Zemin and Hu Jintao, respectively, were the presidents of China, and China was less arrogant and assertive in those years than it has become in recent times. I mean, I have to say, let's just call it. I mean, if I was the foreign minister, I'd be more diplomatic. But let's just call it as it is. China has become more arrogant and more aggressive and less respectful of the rest of the world under Xi Jinping's leadership. And this is now an opportunity for them to roll that arrogance back a bit, become a bit more contrite, and work with the international community. We're all in this together, and that includes with China. But I'm sorry I'm really sorry it's come to this, but understandably, people around the world are going to feel very strongly about it.